G'day there, and welcome to what hopefully will be the last of these presentations that I've put together on the government's proposals in the Three Waters reform space. If you haven't watched all the videos beforehand, some of this might not make a lot of sense, but I appreciate that there's a fair bit of viewing there and that you might have come into this fresh, so I'll try to keep it pretty high level and pretty simple. The purpose of this video, though, is to explain the outcome of the work that I've been putting in as one of 8 elected representatives or mayors from around the country that have been on the government working group to try to find a better way to organise the governance, accountability and so forth of these proposals that the government's put forward. So where to begin? Wow, okay. If you haven't watched those previous videos, I'm not going to put the models up, but basically the government had put out a proposal that said we're going to have these 4 entities across the country. Here in Central Otago will sit in Entity D, and that will encompass almost all of the South Island. So your water services won't be controlled by the CODC anymore. They'll be controlled by Entity D, it's called at the moment, but it'll have, I think it might even be called Southern Entity. It'll have another name by the time it's put in place. That time will be on around about the 1st of July 2024 at the current rate. This government has said it's absolutely dedicated to putting these changes through. So the only thing that's going to stop that happening is, I would think, a change of government in 2023. That's not my department. All I've got to look at is, well, if there isn't a change of government in 2023, I want to make these reforms, which are going to happen otherwise, as good as they can be for Central Otago now and into the future, which was why I put my hand up to be on that working group. It's been a hell of a lot of work since sort of the start of December, and the report's gone to the Minister on Monday and has now been released, so I'm at liberty to speak a bit more freely about what's gone into it. So if you haven't looked at those previous models, the way it's going to work is that there will be a regional representative group. That's important to remember, regional representative group. In the original draft that the government put out, there was going to be 6 council people there and 6 iwi people there. That's the governance group above the board of directors of the entity. And what that governance group would do would be to say to that board of directors, here's kind of the things we want you to do. So it's not running the show, but it's giving guidance to the people who will be running the entities. Now, remember I said it was going to be 6 iwi and 6 council people. When they put out the draft of the bill, so that they sort of had the idea, then they put out the draft of the bill, December, January, must have been December, I think. They said, no, listen, we've heard from councils who are really upset that there's only going to be 6 representatives of council on this regional representative group. In Entity D, there'll be 20 councils involved. So, hey, you've got 6 people. How's that going to work? So we'll allow you, if you want, in any of your entities to have as many people sitting there from the council side as there are councils. So the good news is that Central Otago District Council would have a seat at the table. The problem is there's going to be 19 other council people there, plus 20 iwi. If you've ever sat on a committee of 40 people, I mean, forget it. The other big change in the exposure draft, and if you have looked at the previous model, there was an independent selection panel in there. Its job was to basically appoint the board, but they've taken that out in the exposure draft of the bill and said, no, we'll get the regional representative group to make a subcommittee to do the appointing of the board and also the firing of the board. And I'm not still all that thrilled about that, in all honesty, but anyway. Right, so the government brought out these plans in, I don't know, it must have been October, November, something like that. Council's really, really unhappy about it. Your council's unhappy about it. A lot of councils, most councils throughout the country, unhappy about it, saying, hey, there's not enough here to make us think for a moment that it's a good idea to hand over these assets. Very concerned about it. So they set up this governance group that I've been on to try to find, working group on governance, to try to find a better way forward. But there were some really strong train tracks that we had to stick to. We couldn't go deviating out. So for instance, we couldn't say, hey, these are a really stupid idea, just forget the whole thing. That wasn't in our remit. We were just not able to do that. I mean, we could, but it'll make the whole thing a waste of time because we're not, within the train tracks we're allowed to be on. So those train tracks, as I refer to them, they're on the terms of reference. They had to maintain good governance, which obviously is really important to everybody. They had to maintain, any ideas we came up with had to maintain public ownership. We'll talk more about that later on. They had to maintain the government's view of the Treaty of Waitangi obligations, so 50-50 co-governance between iwi and councils, and they had to keep what is called balance sheet separation, which means that these entities stand on their own 2 feet and don't rely on councils for their income. It's quite important when it comes to getting loans on finance to do their work and stuff. So when I put my hand up for this working group, there was kind of 5 things that I really were very, very passionate about. Maybe not 5. One of them was competency of the boards, because for me, and remember I've said these reforms, it looks very much like they're going to happen unless there's a change of government. So what I didn't want to see was meddling with the board, because if these reforms are going to happen, to my view, the board that runs the entity needs to be as high-powered, as smart, as clever as they can be, as experienced as they can be, so that they do the job as best they can. Because if those boards screw it up, we're going to pay. And when I say we, I mean you, I mean me, I mean everybody in the country. And the reason I get really passionate about this is for the first 3 to 4 years of being mayor, I was dealing with the fallout of when the Aurora board back 10 years ago, or not 10 years ago, but they had 10 years of mismanagement of the Aurora board. And we're paying for that right now with increased line charges. So it was really important to me that board, if the entities happen, that those boards aren't meddled with, because there was quite a few councils that were saying, oh, we need to have a couple of council people, a couple of mayors appointed to the board to keep an eye on things. No, you don't. You want people. I mean, if an ex-mayor or an ex-manager of the waterworks or whatever puts their hand up to be on those boards and their CVs say, hey, this person's got a lot to offer, then sure. But there shouldn't just be somebody there because, hey, we should have a mayor there. And I've seen that happen where, oh, you're on that board and you're like, oh, God, it's just another thing to do, and you get in the way. Similar, I don't believe it's a good idea to have direct iwi appointments to those boards. There will be plenty of Māori people out there who will have the skills and ability to sit on the boards. They get there on their own competency. And so I was really passionate about that. And I'm really pleased to say that has been maintained in the final proposal that we put through to government, that there is no direct appointments or anything like that. The boards are appointed on their merits. So that's good. Another one was the sense of stolen assets, and I totally get why people think this. So over generations of people in Central Otago, we've put assets in the ground. We've put pipes in the ground. We've built, or we are building, take the new Cromwell sewage treatment plant, wastewater treatment plant. Huge, many millions of dollars spent on that, of money from here. You could look at it. And now these are being taken away. And there's a real sense that the assets are being stolen. There's a couple of things there. Firstly, well, they're not being stolen. They're going to stay here. You can't take the pipes out and sell them for lead. They're not lead. Just check and can't sell them for copper. Get it right? They're not copper either. But you know what I mean? You're not going to pack up the Cromwell wastewater plant and move it to Christchurch or anything, are you? The asset's going to stay here. So they're not really being stolen. Control over them is being taken over, though, and that's the control that's the really important thing. But I totally get that sense of, hey, well, these are gone. They're not in our ownership anymore. So what's been proposed to the government by the working group is, in their original model, they said that the entity, so Entity D in our case, will be jointly owned by the 20 councils in the entity area. And we felt that wasn't good enough, that it didn't give people a sense that, hey, these things are owned by us still. So there's been put to government a proposal that a shareholding is created in the entity, and that each district or city at the moment will get a share based on every 50,000 people or part thereof. So in Central Otago, we've got 24,000 people roughly, so we'd get one share. Dunedin's got 117,000 people, they'll get 3 shares. Christchurch, I think, get about 8 shares. They've got 392,000 people, they get about 8 shares. Really important that the shares don't make any difference to the number of people you get on the regional representative group or anything like that. They just solely go to ownership to reflect the communities that have put the assets in to these organisations if the reforms go ahead. But there's another thing that we've recommended to government as well that I think is really, really important, and that's that the ownership share becomes relevant in terms of voting only if and when some bright spark goes, hey, let's sell these things to an American bank or an Australian bank or a Chinese infrastructure company or whatever, a la our power schemes. In that case, there's 3 things that have to happen. Firstly, the regional representative group has to say 75% on that group say, yep, selling's a good idea. There has to be a poll of the public, and 75% or more of 75% have to say, yep, we're in favour of it, that vote. That's always a problem, getting people to vote. And thirdly, now we're bringing in, okay, if those 2 things happen, every single one of those shareholders still has to say we're going to sell these things, because the privatisation The risk of privatisation was another thing that majorly worries me about these reforms. The other thing we're recommending to government too, and in terms of the privatisation, is there is the ability in government to entrench laws. It's not done very often, but you can entrench laws or entrench parts of law. And what entrenchment means is you need 75, well, more than 75% of Parliament to agree to changing it. We've got two examples in New Zealand at the moment. One is the Bill of Rights Act, felt to be such a paramountly important part of our law that it was agreed by the Parliament that brought it in that it needed a supermajority, more than 75% to change it. And the other one is in the Electoral Act. It mainly goes towards the 18 years of age for voting in the election. So what the suggestion is hey, every party, and I read the National chap just now in the last week saying, hey, privatisation's a real risk here. It really is. And any government can come in and privatise these entities. And he's right. He's absolutely right. What is being said is to try to get cross-party support for just that bit of the law about the water entities that says you need full shareholder support for privatisation. Because a future government could come in and take that out if they've got more than 50% of the votes. If we get it entrenched, it becomes 75% of the votes. It doesn't mean you can't come in as a future government and say, we're scrapping the whole thing. We're just scrapping the whole thing. That can be done. But they can't just go and sell it. So that seems to be quite a good idea. Local control is the other big one for me. Well, not local control. Control is absolutely the wrong word, actually. And if I wasn't already 11 and a half minutes through this video, I'd stop and start again because it was so much the wrong word. Local voice is what I'm trying to say. And that's really important because remember that regional representative group that I said originally it was 6 councils were going to be on it? Now they've said there can be 20, which is going to make 40 in our area. Absolutely hopeless by the time you have one for iwi for every councillor. Doesn't make sense. So what we are suggesting to government is go back to that smaller regional representative group so that it can actually function. We can't have a bloated thing with 40 people in it. It'll get nothing done. But have feeder groups going up into it that have a seat for each council at that table. So, and I say this purely hypothetically because it would have to be sorted out from here if the government even goes with it. You may, in Entity D, have a Southland sub-regional representative group, an Otago sub-RRG, a Christchurch sub-RRG, a Rest of Canterbury sub-RRG, and a West Coast sub-RRG. So in the Otago one, we would sit at the table with Central Otago, Queenstown Lakes, Clutha, Dunedin City, and Waitaki. And we would then, that group potentially, would have one person on the RRG so that, we can sit down and we can say, why hasn't the wastewater scheme in Patearoa been finished yet? This isn't good enough. Why is it not getting the priority that some stuff other places is getting? How is it that our there's a subdivision that's ready to go, but you can't get the infrastructure in? What's going on? Those high-level questions, which are really, really, really important, the things that we have to deal with at council. We may well be sitting at the top table in the RRG because there'll be one representative of the subgroup. But if we're not, we're sitting at the table next to it. We're in we're still getting that local voice in without having that bloated big RRG. So I think that's a really good idea. I think it's going to work well if the government takes any notice of it. I don't know. The other one that I've been really passionate about in amongst all of this is at the moment, and it's happened a few times to me, somebody's had, hasn't happened often, but it does happen. A water meter plays up, something's gone wrong with the water meter, there's a big bill, and they ring staff at council and go, hey, I've got a big bill, and staff go, well, we think that's your problem, it's not ours, come on. That doesn't generally happen, there's processes in place, but there's been a few things where, say, a water meter's broken twice within 6 months, or the argument is by the customer that it has. In 5 or 10 years' time, if these reforms go ahead, or even in 5 years' time, waste of time ringing up your mayor or your councillor, which you do now, to say, hey, I'm having a real problem with your staff getting this sorted out. Can you help? Because we won't have any influence. It'll be the same as when the power goes out and I get hold of Aurora and go, why the hell has the power gone out again? They give me reasons why the power's gone out, but there's nothing I can do. So when it comes to sorting out, particularly when it comes to the dollars and cents stuff, the money side of losing out, if you're a customer and you're dealing with this massive water entity who's based in Christchurch who, isn't giving you a fair go, we're pushing that there be an ombudsman appointed so that you've got an independent person or organisation that you can ring and go, hey, I got a $1,400 water bill here. There's something wrong at the meter. I don't reckon it's my fault. They're not listening to me. Please help. So we've pushed that into the government and said, you've got to protect your people here. And again, I've come into a lot of the work I've done on this based around the experience I've had with dealing with people's worries and concerns and the bills they're getting from those years of Aurora mismanagement in the past. So that's influenced me strongly in where I'm at. So that's a quarter of an hour. If you're still watching, thank you very much. It's complicated. It really is. Where does it go from here? The recommendations will go to government. Government may or may not take them on board. The draft exposure bill will be turned into a bill, which will go to select committee. People can submit to the select committee and so forth. And then it's supposed to become law, and the whole thing's supposed to happen 1st of July 2024, unless there's a change of government, which is realistically, as I see it, if you're anti this thing, that's where it sits. We've got a government that's doing what a government does, which is making policy. So, look, I know there was a lot in that. If you want to discuss this further, if you want to have a conversation about it, get in touch with me. More than happy to come and talk to you, have a conversation on the phone, come and talk to your group, set up a Zoom meeting if we're not having meetings because of Omicron in the community. If you want further understanding, just get in touch with me, because I've done a huge amount of work in the space and probably know a thing or two about it, not being a smart ass, but I've done the mahi, so I do. That really is it. There was a lot there, as I say. If you want to get hold of me, mayor@codc.govt.nz, or you can ring me 021 639 625 with any questions you may have. Thanks for watching. Cheers. Bye.